Morgan gripped the armrests of her seat, knuckles whitening as she tried to focus on the landscape rushing past the train window. The gentle rocking that normally lulled her into a peaceful state during her weekly commute now only intensified her awareness of the woman hovering over her, glaring with the entitled indignation of someone unaccustomed to hearing the word no. "Hi, asterisk," said asterisk. "My son needs your seat," the woman repeated, her voice rising just enough to draw the attention of nearby passengers. "Look at him. He's clearly too big for the regular seats." Morgan glanced at the teenager standing beside his mother. He must have been close to 6'4", with broad shoulders that indeed made him look cramped in the narrow confines of the economy train car. His face burned crimson as he stared at the floor, clearly mortified by his mother's behavior. "I'm sorry," Morgan said, trying to keep her voice level, "but I reserved this seat specifically. It's a 3-hour journey, and I have work to do." She gestured to her laptop and the stack of papers beside her. The window seat in the quiet car had cost her an extra $15. Money well spent for the peace and table space she needed to prepare for tomorrow's presentation. The woman, middle-aged with an expensive-looking handbag and the kind of highlights that suggested regular salon visits, scoffed and rolled her eyes. "It's just a seat," she said, waving her hand dismissively. "My son is an athlete. He has special needs for his legs. Do you really want to be responsible for causing him discomfort?" A few weeks ago, Morgan might have surrendered. Old Morgan, the one who had spent most of her 32 years trying to avoid conflict at all costs, would have gathered her belongings and retreated to standing room by the doors. But that Morgan had disappeared 3 months ago, along with her marriage and the self-doubt her ex-husband had so carefully cultivated. "Your son looks perfectly capable of standing for a while," Morgan replied, maintaining eye contact with the woman. "Or perhaps you could give him your seat if you're concerned about his comfort." The teenager's eyes widened slightly, and Morgan thought she caught the ghost of a smile before he quickly composed his face back into careful neutrality. "How asterisk dare asterisk you?" The woman's voice now carried through the entire car. "I have never been so insulted in my life. Do you know who I am?" Morgan didn't, in fact, know who this woman was, nor did she particularly care. What she did know was that her therapist had spent weeks helping her rebuild boundaries, those invisible but crucial lines that protected her sense of self from being eroded by the demands of others. "I'm afraid I don't," Morgan said calmly, "but I do know that I paid for this seat, and I plan to stay in it." The train conductor, a heavy-set man with salt and pepper hair and the weary expression of someone who had mediated countless passenger disputes, approached them. "Is there a problem here?" he asked, looking between Morgan and the increasingly agitated woman. This person refuses to accommodate my son," the woman sputtered, gesturing wildly. "Can't you see how big he is? He needs a proper seat with legroom." The conductor turned to Morgan with a questioning look. "I reserved this specific seat," Morgan explained, pulling up her ticket on her phone screen. "I need the table space for work." The conductor nodded slowly and turned back to the woman. "Ma'am, if your son requires special accommodations, you should have purchased appropriate tickets in advance. I'm afraid I'll have to ask you to take your assigned seats or find available unreserved ones." The woman's face contorted with rage. She opened her mouth to protest further, but her son finally spoke up. "Mom, please," he muttered, tugging gently at her sleeve. "Let's just go. There are other seats." Morgan watched as the teenager's simple words seemed to deflate his mother's indignation. With a final glare in Morgan's direction, the woman allowed herself to be led away by her son, her parting, "Well, I never," hanging in the air behind them. As the train continued its journey, Morgan turned back to her work, surprised to find her hands steady and her heart rate normal. 6 months ago, such a confrontation would have left her shaking and apologizing. Today, it felt like another small victory in reclaiming her space in the world. 20 minutes had passed since the confrontation, but Morgan could still feel the occasional glances from other passengers. The quiet car had returned to its intended state of peaceful silence, with only the rhythmic clacking of the train tracks providing a soothing backdrop to her work. She had managed to review half her presentation slides, but her mind kept drifting back to the entitled woman and her mortified son. From her window seat, Morgan had a partial view into the next car where the woman had eventually settled. Even from a distance, her displeasure was evident in her rigid posture and animated gestures as she complained to anyone within earshot. Her son sat beside her, hunched as if trying to make himself smaller despite his considerable size. Quite the show earlier, wasn't it? Morgan looked up to find an elderly gentleman smiling at her from across the aisle. He had salt and pepper hair and kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. He had been reading a well-worn paperback when the commotion began. "I didn't mean to cause a scene," Morgan replied, keeping her voice low to respect the quiet car rules. The man waved his hand dismissively. "You didn't cause anything. That woman brought her own storm with her." He extended his hand across the aisle. "Harold Peterson." "Morgan Chen," she replied, shaking his hand briefly. Harold continued, leaning slightly closer. I've been riding this train twice weekly for 15 years. The entitlement I've witnessed could fill a book, and I'm actually writing one. Morgan raised her eyebrows in interest. People like that woman, they move through the world expecting it to bend to their will, Harold explained. I call them reality resistors. They simply refuse to accept that the same rules apply to them as everyone else. As if on cue, a commotion erupted from the next car. Morgan and Harold both peered through the connecting door window to see the same woman now arguing with a train attendant over the price of snacks from the food cart. I come here every month. I should get a discount. Her voice carried faintly through the closed door. Morgan shook her head in disbelief. Does she think the world exists solely to serve her? In her mind, absolutely, Harold nodded. My late wife was a psychologist. She would have had a field day analyzing that woman's behavior. The train slowed as it approached the next station. Harold gathered his things and stood. This is my stop, he said. But I wanted to tell you what you did back there, standing your ground. More people need to do that. The entitled only thrive because the rest of us give in to avoid conflict. He handed Morgan a business card. If you ever want to share that story for my book, give me a call. I collect tales of entitlement encounters. As Harold departed, the train car gradually filled with new passengers. A harried-looking woman with two small children took the seats across from Morgan. The children were well-behaved, coloring quietly in their activity books, but their mother kept apologizing preemptively for any disruption they might cause. They won't bother you, I promise, she whispered to Morgan. I've been teaching them about respecting shared spaces. Morgan smiled reassuringly. They seem wonderful. Please don't worry. The woman relaxed visibly. Thank you. I'm always so conscious of not being that asterisk parent, the one who acts like their children own the world. I think I just met that parent, Morgan replied, and they shared a knowing smile. An hour into the journey, Morgan took a break from her work and headed to the restroom. To reach it, she had to pass through the car where the entitled woman and her son were seated. As she approached, she overheard the woman berating a young attendant. What do you mean you're out of gluten-free options? Do you know what gluten does to my system? I want to speak to your supervisor immediately. The attendant, barely out of her teens, looked close to tears. I'm sorry, ma'am, but we only stock a limited selection on this route. I can offer you fruit or... Fruit? Fruit? Do I look like someone who should have to settle for just fruit? Without thinking, Morgan paused beside them. Excuse me, she said to the attendant. Could I get a coffee when you have a moment? No rush. The grateful look on the young woman's face was worth the daggers being glared at her by the entitled mother. You again, the woman hissed. Are you following me now? Just heading to the restroom, Morgan replied calmly. The one all passengers are entitled to use. She emphasized the word entitled just enough to make her point without being overtly rude. The train had just passed through a tunnel, briefly plunging the car into darkness before the lights flickered back to full strength. Morgan saved her presentation file and closed her laptop. 2 hours into the journey, she had finally completed her work and could relax for the remaining hour. She reached for her water bottle, only to find it empty. Sighing, she stood up and made her way toward the cafe car. The train swayed gently as it rounded a bend, causing Morgan to grip the backs of seats for balance. As she entered the adjoining car, she nearly collided with someone coming from the opposite direction. Sorry, I wasn't, she began, then stopped abruptly when she recognized the tall figure before her. It was the entitled woman's son. Up close, he looked even younger than she had initially thought, perhaps 16 or 17. His cheeks flushed immediately with recognition. Excuse me, he mumbled, attempting to step around her in the narrow passage. No problem, Morgan replied, moving aside. She expected him to continue past, but instead he hesitated. Actually, he said, his voice quiet but determined, can I talk to you for a minute? Surprised, Morgan nodded. Sure. The teenager glanced nervously over his shoulder toward the car where his mother was seated, then gestured toward an empty pair of seats nearby. My mom went to complain to the conductor about the temperature, he explained as they sat down. So I have a few minutes before she comes looking for me. Morgan waited, curious about what this boy wanted to say. I'm Ethan, he finally offered, extending his hand awkwardly. Morgan, she replied, shaking it briefly. Ethan took a deep breath. I wanted to apologize for what happened earlier, with my mom and the seat thing. He stared down at his oversized hands, which he kept clasping and unclasping in his lap. She's always been like this, but it seems to be getting worse. There was something in his voice, a weariness that seemed too heavy for someone his age, that touched Morgan. You don't need to apologize for your mother's behavior, she said gently. But I do, Ethan insisted, because I never stop her. I just stand there and let her steamroll over everyone, and then I die a little inside from embarrassment. He let out a humorless laugh. Do you know what it's like to be in a restaurant with her? Or a hotel? Or literally anywhere customer service exists? Morgan could imagine. It must be difficult. She wasn't always this bad, Ethan continued, gazing out the window at the passing countryside. But after my dad left 3 years ago, something changed. It's like she's constantly trying to prove that she deserves special treatment, as if that somehow makes up for him leaving. Morgan felt a pang of sympathy. Her own divorce had sent her in the opposite direction, making her question whether she deserved anything at all. It had taken months of therapy to recognize that pattern. That doesn't excuse it, Ethan added quickly. I know that. And watching you stand up to her today, he trailed off, seeming to search for the right words. It was the first time I've seen someone not back down. Usually people just give her what she wants to make her stop. That usually just reinforces the behavior, Morgan observed. Ethan nodded vigorously. Exactly. But I never knew how to tell her that. I'm on the basketball team and my coach talks about accountability all the time. How we have to own our mistakes and not blame others. But my mom, he stopped, seeming to realize he might be saying too much. Anyway, he continued after a moment, I just wanted you to know that not everyone in my family is like that. And I'm sorry you had to deal with her. Morgan studied the young man beside her. There was a quiet dignity in his apology, a maturity that suggested he had been forced to grow up faster than he should have. Thank you, Ethan, she said. That means a lot, and for what it's worth, I think it shows real character that you recognize the problem. A small smile appeared on Ethan's face. I've been saving up, for college. I got a part-time job that my mom doesn't know about. That's impressive, Morgan said. Where are you hoping to go? State. It's not fancy, but they have a good engineering program, and it's far enough away that. He stopped himself again, but Morgan understood what remained unsaid. Far enough away from his mother's influence. The train's intercom crackled to life, announcing the next station was 10 minutes away. I should get back, Ethan said hurriedly, standing up. She'll be looking for me, and if she sees me talking to you. I understand, Morgan assured him. Good luck, Ethan. He nodded gratefully and turned to leave, but paused. Can I ask you something? How did you do it? Stand up to her like that? Most people just give in. 2 days later, Morgan stood on the platform waiting for the return train, scrolling through emails on her phone. Her presentation had gone exceptionally well. So well that her boss had mentioned the possibility of her leading the entire project moving forward. A faint smile played on her lips as she savored the feeling of recognition that had been so long denied in her previous life. The station announcement system crackled to life, informing passengers that the train would be arriving 10 minutes late due to signal problems further up the line. Morgan didn't mind the delay, the sun was shining, and the extra time gave her a chance to enjoy the coffee she purchased from the small kiosk on the platform. As she sipped her coffee, a familiar voice cut through the ambient noise of the station. Morgan's stomach clenched involuntarily as she recognized the entitled tone that had confronted her 2 days earlier. What do you mean there are no first-class tickets available? Do you know how much my son and I have spent traveling on this line this year? Morgan turned slowly, confirming her suspicion. There at the ticket window stood the entitled mother, gesticulating wildly at the unimpressed ticket agent. Ethan stood several feet behind her, his tall frame hunched as if trying to dissociate himself from the scene. Hoping to avoid another confrontation, Morgan moved to the far end of the platform. She had no desire to replay their previous encounter, especially not after the surprisingly pleasant conversation with Ethan. She pulled out her phone and pretended to be deeply engrossed in it, angling herself away from the mother-son duo. The strategy worked until the train finally pulled into the station. As passengers began to board, Morgan deliberately waited until the entitled woman and Ethan had entered a different car before approaching the doors nearest her. Just as she was about to step on, a voice called out behind her. Hey, Morgan, right? She turned to find Ethan jogging toward her, a backpack slung over one shoulder. Hi, Ethan, she replied, surprised. Everything okay? He glanced nervously over his shoulder. Yeah, my mom's in the first car, complaining about not getting upgraded. I told her I was going to find a bathroom. He shifted his weight from one foot to the other. I was hoping maybe I could sit in your car. She'll come looking for me eventually, but I could use a break. Morgan hesitated only briefly before nodding. Of course. They boarded together, finding a pair of seats in the middle of the car. Ethan seemed different today. There was a nervous energy about him that hadn't been present during their previous conversation. How was your own work thing? He asked as the train pulled away from the station. It went well, Morgan replied. Better than expected, actually. That's good. Ethan fidgeted with the zipper on his backpack. I've been thinking a lot about what you said, about standing up for yourself and all that. Oh, Morgan prompted when he fell silent. Yeah, after we talked, I went back to my seat, and my mom spent like 20 minutes complaining about you. about how rude and selfish you were." He laughed without humor. The irony was pretty thick. Morgan couldn't help but smile. "I can imagine." But then Ethan continued, his voice dropping slightly. "She started in on the train attendant again, the one who brought our food. She said there was too much ice in her drink and she demanded a new one, and she was just so mean about it." He looked up at Morgan, his eyes troubled. "And for the first time, I didn't just sit there. I said, 'Mom, it's fine. Just drink it.' And when she kept going, I told her she was embarrassing me." "That must have been difficult," Morgan said softly. Ethan nodded. "She didn't speak to me for 3 hours afterward, but then it was like it never happened. She just reset to default." He paused. "That's why I wanted to sit with you today. I need to tell you something important." Before he could continue, the connecting door at the end of the car opened, revealing the entitled mother. Her gaze swept the car until it landed on Ethan, then shifted to Morgan. Her eyes narrowed. "Ethan," she called out loud enough to draw attention from other passengers. "What are you doing sitting with asterisk her asterisk?" Ethan's face paled slightly, but he didn't move. "Just talking, Mom." The woman marched down the aisle, her designer handbag swinging wildly from her arm. "I've been looking all over for you. I had asked 3 different attendants if they'd seen you." She stopped beside their seats, pointedly ignoring Morgan. "Come back to our car. I spoke to the conductor, and they're giving us complimentary drinks for the inconvenience of not having first class available." "I'm fine here, Mom," Ethan said quietly. The woman's expression flickered between surprise and irritation. "Don't be ridiculous. Come on." 3 months later, Morgan found herself at the same train station, queuing for her ticket. The summer heat had given way to autumn Christmas, and she wrapped her light jacket more tightly around herself as a cool breeze swept across the platform. Her life had transformed significantly in those 3 months. The project she presented had been a massive success, leading to a promotion that required more frequent travel between offices. She'd also moved into a new apartment, a space entirely her own, decorated according to her preferences without compromise. Small victories in the ongoing process of reclaiming her life. As she approached the ticket counter, Morgan heard a familiar voice call her name. Turning, she was surprised to see Ethan waving at her from near the station cafe. He looked different. His hair was shorter, and he carried himself with a confidence that hadn't been present during their previous encounters. "Morgan, I thought that was you," he said, walking over. "Are you catching the 10:15 too?" "I am," she replied, genuinely pleased to see him. "How are you, Ethan?" "Good. Really good, actually." He gestured toward the cafe. "Do you have a few minutes before the train? I'd love to catch up if you don't mind." Morgan checked her watch. "Sure, I have time." They settled at a small table with their coffees, an Americano for Morgan and a caramel latte with an extra shot for Ethan. It was such a normal, everyday scene, yet Morgan couldn't help but reflect on how their unusual connection had begun. "So," she said, "how did things go with your mom? About the scholarship, I mean." Ethan's expression turned complicated, a mixture of pride and residual stress. "It was intense. I waited 2 more days after I saw you on the train. Then I finally showed her the letter." "And?" Morgan prompted when he paused. "She cried," Ethan said, surprising Morgan. Not sad tears, though. She was proud. Kept saying how her son was so smart, how she'd always known I was special. He stirred his lie absently. Then she started making plans for how she'd visit every weekend, how she helped decorate my dorm room, how she'd make sure I had the right meal plan. Morgan nodded, understanding immediately. Taking over. "Exactly," Ethan confirmed. "So I'd have another conversation with her. A harder one." He took a deep breath. "I told her that part of college was becoming independent and that I needed space to do that." "That must have been difficult," Morgan said softly. "It was the hardest thing I've ever done," Ethan admitted. She didn't take it well at first. There were a lot of tears, a lot of "after everything I've done for you" speeches. She can threaten to withhold her permission. "But the scholarship was already yours," Morgan pointed out. A small smile played across Ethan's face. "That's what I told her. And then I said something I never thought I'd have the courage to say." "What was that?" "I told her that I loved her, but that her behavior had been embarrassing me for years, that the way she treated service workers and strangers made people uncomfortable, that it wasn't okay to demand special treatment everywhere we went." Ethan's voice grew quiet. "I told her that Dad didn't leave because of me, he left because of her entitlement." Morgan's eyebrows rose. How did she respond to that? "She didn't speak to me for 2 weeks," Ethan said, "which was actually kind of peaceful, if I'm being honest." He laughed softly. "But then something unexpected happened. She started seeing a therapist." "Really?" Ethan nodded, looking as surprised by this development as Morgan felt. "It turns out beneath all that entitlement was just fear. Fear of not being enough, of being overlooked, of losing control." He shrugged. "At least that's what she told me after her 3rd session." Morgan found herself thinking of her own therapy journey after her divorce, how she had to confront the ways she'd allowed herself to be diminished, how she had to rebuild her sense of self-worth from the ground up. It's still a work in progress, Ethan continued. Last week at a restaurant, she started to complain about how her steak was cooked, but then she caught herself. I could see her literally biting her tongue. He smiled at the memory. Small steps. That's remarkable, Ethan, Morgan said sincerely. For both of you. The station loudspeaker announced their train would be arriving in 5 minutes. We should probably head to the platform, Morgan suggested, gathering her things. As they walked, Ethan added, I started at State 2 weeks ago. Engineering program is even better than I hoped. And my roommate is cool, nothing like me. He's into theater and art, but we get along great. And your mom? She calls every day, but I got her down to just 5 minutes. He grinned. Like I said, progress.